Greetings, everyone. Warm welcome. It is an honour to have you here at the Saphira Centre of Shamanism, where we break down the ancient esoteric practices of shamanism and the occult, bringing them into balance with the deep psyche. My name is Luke, experienced practitioner and mentor of the shamanic and occult sciences. It is an honour to have you here. Thank you for joining me once again. Be sure to find me over on Patreon if you're wanting access to powerful occult technologies, various tools, and lots of powerful initiatory systems. If you're wanting access to the Sephirotic initiatory process and guidance, as well as the Qliphoth, the Necronomicon Gnosis, Transcending the Zodiac, Angel Magic, Daemon Magic, Jinn Magic, the Primordial Dragons, workings with the Goetia, as well as many other things with new content uploaded multiple times each week, then you can gain access at just £20 per month. You can find this in the second link of the description of this video. Or if you want something more premium, then be sure to check out the Saphira Shamanic School, my premium membership service. If you're wanting to work more closely with me as a mentor, you can find this in the first link of the description of this video. I look forward to seeing you over there. So today, we're going to be discussing the higher self and the lower self in Qabalistic terms from the lens of occult Qabalah. We're going to be looking at the Tree of Life as an example for this, but I'm also going to translate that to the Tree of Death, the Qliphoth, as well. Now, the Tree of Life, there's lots of different ways that you can look at this diagram, and this is one of the most powerful ways that you can look at this diagram and study it. The Tree of Life is made up of the supernal triad, basically representing the three spheres of the higher self: divine understanding, wisdom, and oneness. That separates the supernal triad is the abyss, also referred to as the Da'ath. The Da'ath acts as a mirror in which the higher self, represented by the upper three spheres, namely Keter, Hokmah, and Binah, basically observes itself in this reflection and then perceives itself as set identity structures, which is represented by the lower seven spheres, namely Malkuth, Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Tifereth, Geburah, and Chesed. Now, it's important to realise that the lower seven spheres within the Qabalah represent the lower self and the different qualities / personas of the lower self, and the supernal triad, Binah, Hokmah, and Keter, represent the different aspects of the higher self. Therefore, the process of moving through the abyss is the process of tasting your separation from divinity in a very deep way in order to deconstruct your various different personality traits that are built off of illusion, so that you can start to move into resonance and actually identify with the fluid aspects of your higher self that are represented by the supernal triad. So we're going to be discussing this in depth today so that you can understand what the real purpose of initiation via occult Qabalah through the Tree of Life and mirrored by the Tree of Death actually means for your evolutionary process. Ultimately, you are here to ultimately observe and integrate your lower self, which is represented by the lower seven spheres, and integrate your higher self and embody it within the physical, tangible body, represented by the supernal triad. So definitely stay tuned as we dive in to this very interesting approach of Qabalah, observing the higher self and the lower self. So it's very important to realise that Qabalah is a very adaptable process according to which paradigm and intention that you are going in to this initiatory process from. However, if you are self-initiating, particularly if you are using occult Qabalah, This initiatory system is very intense because you are interacting with much more raw aspects of cosmic intelligence, whereas many other systems of initiation only do it through theoretical practice or maybe even through journeying. It still triggers archetypal experiences in one's day-to-day life, but it is still operating from the illusion of separation. So when you're self-initiating, the purpose of this initiation is to bring the energy of the given portion of the tree that you're initiating into. The purpose of it is to bring the energy of that region into your field to then be exposed to its alchemy. Now, the alchemical pursuit that you will go on will depend on which sphere that you are initiating into and also what portion of the tree you are initiating into. So if I show the tree diagram here, this is the tree of life, and I'm also going to show the abyss, which separates the supernal triad, the higher self, from the 7 lower spheres, which are the different aspects of the lower self. So initiation through the lower spheres, you go from Malkuth up to Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Tifereth, Geburah, and Chesed. The purpose of initiation through these lower spheres is to attune yourself to the various qualities of your lower self. Okay, these are tangible cosmic principles of the lower self in the microcosm that are there to basically represent qualities to be mastered in your evolutionary process. So the purpose is to basically fill yourself with all of this divine angelic energy and basically undergo archetypal initiations that are there to basically help you to develop these necessary qualities. So in Malkuth, the lower sphere, it's very earthly, finding the divine in the physical, tangible experience, having trials through means of mundane tasks, and finding that true magic within your physical, tangible experience. It's actually a challenging initiatory process. Yesod is all about the subconscious mind, astral travel, and the dream state. Understanding the core aspects of yourself that are stored within your subconscious mind, the formative plane, so that you can begin to understand what beliefs are impacting, or what unconscious/subconscious beliefs are impacting the manifestation of your reality. When you move into Hod, it's all about developing logic, reason, and analysis in a balanced way, learning how to walk the path of the scholar. This is the aspect of yourself that tries to win through intellect, learning how to master that aspect of yourself instead of deny it. You then move into Netzach, which is the polar opposite, whilst Hod represents logic, reason, analysis, the path of the scholar. Netzach represents that pure Venusian energy of creative expression and the path of the artist, as well as the embodiment of the deep emotional state, and often the healing of relational trauma. Both go hand in hand. This completes the astral triad made up of Yesod, Hod, and Netzach. You then move into Tifereth, where you embody what you could call Christ consciousness, whereas if you went into the Tree of Death, you'd be facing Thagirion and you'd be embodying Antichrist consciousness. In Tifereth, you're facing Christ consciousness in a very direct and tangible way, and the purpose of this is to put you in contact, in initial contact, with a core aspect of your higher self and understanding how that fits into your physical, tangible experience. So many people receive trials in Tifereth because it is the middle of the tree. They receive trials of being in a crossroads. Either they follow the path of the lower self, or they follow the path of the higher self, or they find the equilibrium between them, okay, integrating both of them together. Many people report true initiation through Tifereth often feeling like being crucified, as they are made to embody the real responsibility of being a divine incarnate. They then move into Geburah, where you learn how to purify blockages, you learn how to apply the necessary boundaries in different aspects of your life and how to embody somewhat the inner narcissist, how to serve yourself, and then you bring that into perfect balance with Chesed, which is the ever-flowing river of love, compassion, and kindness that brings Geburah into balance. So these core 7 spheres, if you look at it from a religious perspective, these would be symbolic of basically the 7 days that it took the creator to cultivate reality, to cultivate the earth, basically. Or you can look at it from the perspective of the 7 Hermetic principles that make up our multiverse as we know it. So initiation through the 7 lower spheres is basically there to help you to master these various different qualities. From an occult perspective, it's there to help you basically expand these different energetic centers, increase your capacity for receiving the higher knowledge, and ultimately to prepare you for the abyssal crossing. Now, the abyssal crossing is where you have to let your lower self go. Whereas the 7 lower spheres often hold trials that are very much about dwelling within reality as you know it, the abyss is where reality as you know it completely fractures, and you have to understand who you are beyond that. Now, many New Age systems of Kabbalah miss out the abyss. I think this is just completely crazy when people miss out the abyss, because how can you actually access the true higher aspects of yourself without first experiencing separation in its rawest form? Now, many people describe the abyss in different ways. It's a very complex process of initiation, and how I like to refer to this, and how I've seen many scholars refer to it as well, namely Lon Milo Duquette and other types of practitioners as well, particularly William Gray in this book, Qabalistic Concepts. This is how I started. This is how I got into this work. Highly recommend reading, although it is a little bit complicated and I feel a little bit hard to get into properly. Many of these scholars refer to the abyss as a mirror. Okay, and I like to adopt this belief system and this viewpoint of it as well. Basically, what the supernal triad represents, Binah, Hokmah, and Kether, is the higher aspects of yourself projecting itself downwards into the different expressions of the lower self. So basically, your higher self is the supernal triad, these upper 3 spheres of oneness, wisdom, and understanding that hold every aspect of your being together. What's happened when you've come into this physical, tangible experience is that it's a bit like your higher self has looked into a mirror and is then projecting itself into that reflection. So basically what's happening when you come into this physical body is that you are being wired to identify with the reflection in the mirror. And the abyss is the threshold that separates the reflection from the source. So how we are taught to operate according to the lower 7 spheres of the Kabbalistic tree, we are taught to operate according to various different personas that we have been taught to emanate. These different personas, mirrored by these 7 spheres, make up the personality traits of the lower self. So let me explain that again, just so people understand. We have the higher self, which projects itself downwards and separates itself into the lower self. The abyss is the mirror that represents that projection. Okay, the higher self looks in the mirror and identifies with what it sees. In doing so, it projects its consciousness into this mirror, into this reflection, and basically we in this microcosmic form have learnt to identify with our reflection and not with our source. So everything that you are emanating on the level of personality traits, all things that you've been taught, is basically you by default learning how to identify. It's basically you identifying with this reflection that is being mirrored back via the higher self looking into that reflection. So basically the purpose of crossing the abyss is to break the mirror. Okay, to break the mirror. And what happens when you enter the abyss ritually, the Sephirotic abyss anyway, is that it's like taking a hammer to a mirror and then watching yourself shatter and break into lots of different aspects of self. And then you become aware of the different masks that you have been taught to wear. Basically, you're having all of these different reflections of you mirrored back to you in different ways. One may enable you to see the side of your face. One may enable you to see the front of your face. One even may be able to show you the back of your head, aspects of yourself that you weren't able to see. So the process of entering into the Da'ath is taking a hammer and breaking that mirror, and the Da'athic initiation is the process of watching those identities basically gradually crack and eventually shatter completely in the mirror, allowing yourself clear pathway into the gnosis of your higher self. Okay, so the abyss is the separation point. When we look from Malkuth, when we look from the lower aspects of ourself up into the higher aspects of ourself, we cannot perceive that. We perceive darkness, we perceive the abyss because our higher aspects of ourselves is separated by that wall of separation. Okay, when we are looking at the wall of separation from basically from our perspective in a physical body up to the higher self, all we are seeing is a chasm of separation, because that is what was required for us to get to know ourselves in this physical, tangible experience. So if you're journeying from the bottom of the tree up, from Malkuth to Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Tifereth, Geburah, Chesed, and crossing the abyss, you're willingly entering that chasm. But in order to cross to the other side, you have to let the various aspects of your older self, of your lower self, pass into the abyss to be purified. Does this get rid of the lower self? No, it does not get rid of the lower self. It purifies the lower self and makes the lower self a clearer vessel. Okay, basically what you're doing when you're climbing the different spheres, when you're initiating into the different spheres, you are initiating into, basically, if I initiate into Yesod, then I'm initiating into a sphere that contains both Yesod and Malkuth. Then if I initiate into Hod, I'm initiating into a sphere that contains both Hod, Yesod, and Malkuth. Netzach, it contains Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkuth. Which means when you initiate into the supernal triad, you are initiating into the core aspects of your higher self that are basically encasing your lower self. Okay, this is why often diagrams of the Kabbalah they often appear as like just circles. Okay, so you've got Malkuth in the middle, then you've got Yesod that surrounds Malkuth, you've got Hod that surrounds Yesod, you've got Netzach that surrounds Hod, and so on and so forth. Okay, and then Kether is right on the outside, representing the oneness that is encasing all of humanity. So this means that when you reach into the supernal triad, when I eventually get into Binah, then I am tapping into the Divine Mother, which is basically holding the birth point of the newer aspects of my lower self that are now in harmony with my higher self, with my true will. When I initiate into Chokmah, the Divine Masculine, I am initiating into a sphere that also contains the Divine Feminine sphere, Binah, and all of the lower 7 spheres. Just the same as if I initiate into Kether, I am initiating into an extremely expansive form of all aspects of the tree. Kether represents that pure, unregulated divine union, that unregulated oneness that has not yet separated itself. So it basically holds the blueprint of the entire tree before it separated itself. So when you are eventually entering into that supernal triad, you are basically gaining gnosis into the real architecture of the lower self and the reasons why you have come here in the first place. But in order to move into genuine resonance with that space, you need to go through the Da'ath and witness taking a hammer to that mirror, which is the Da'ath, and witnessing the shattering of the different aspects of yourself. Observe them, own them, honor them for what they have taught you, but let them fall away. And then you can move into the unknown space that is the supernal triad. Now, the reason why the Da'ath is a very painful process and is a very disorientating process is because you are breaking apart slash witnessing the live fracturing of everything that you have known, everything that you have known as a person. And this is the case in both the Sephiroth and the Qliphoth as well. But in the Qliphoth, you go through it at in a more intense way, because you're kind of becoming an aspect of the abyss, which I'll get to in a moment. With the Sephiroth, the purpose is literally to break that layer that is holding together your different identity structures that previously have been unified into a single consciousness. So let me explain that a little bit further. You yourself, as the higher self, looking into the mirror, you're identifying with the reflection that is looking back at you. As you are identifying with that reflection, you are defining your sense of self. That's who I am. Okay, I am Luke, I look like this, I like that, and it's all one unified consciousness. With the Da'ath, you take the hammer, break open the Da'ath, and therefore you are breaking yourself into different aspects. So the ego initially fragments itself into lots of different aspects, and you become even more aware of the different masks and personas that have been shaping your sense of self, shaping the artificial aspect of you that you basically thought was you all along. Okay, and this aspect of yourself that you are watching basically gradually fracture and eventually break are the different aspects of you that have been established from your past trauma. Okay, from the karma that you have come here to process. So as you separated yourself down into Malkuth, your higher self looked into that mirror. In the microcosm, you've learnt to identify with the reflection that is looking back at you in that mirror. At which point, everything in your life becomes a mechanism to feed the reflection that is looking back at you, including your trauma. Okay, this sense of self continues to then develop, this false sense of self continues to grow, continues to evolve, continues to develop, and everything that you do, even if you're trauma informed, even later on in life, unless you go through this identity rupturing process that is required to actually truly connect to your higher self, then everything that you do will be feeding the reflection of you and not the real you. Everything that you do will be feeding the persona of you, the unified consciousness of your falsehood, without actually understanding what is beyond it. So many people approach initiatory systems. I was no different. I also approached initiatory systems such as the Qliphoth, the Sephiroth, with the intent to feed my false self. Even if you think that you have the intent not to, at the end of the day, it is the ego that seduces you into this initiatory process. I approach these initiatory systems with the intent to build, okay, with the intent to build different aspects of me. I didn't realize until I crossed the abyss, and realistically, like until I got to Gagiel slash Hokmar, I didn't realize what the abyss was actually doing. Okay, and I still don't fully understand it. And this is another thing. Okay, the abyss has a very complex way of working, and you're never going to fully understand what actually took place there. And that's the purpose of it. It's mystery. Okay, it's a mystery. It's unknown. It's a liminal space. You're not supposed to fully understand it. But I do have a stronger understanding as to the real purpose of that process now, having witnessed myself go through it, my partner going through the Sephirotic abyss, other people I've mentored going through the different abyssal realms. I have a much clearer understanding as to what the Da'ath is actually about now, and that is to take yourself on that process of rupturing everything that you thought was important about yourself. Everything you thought that was important, everything that you have basically been using to fuel your falsehood needs to go in the abyss. And it's not an overnight process in both trees, okay? The abyss is slow, it's gradual, okay? If you take a hammer to a mirror, keep using this example because I love it, take a hammer to a mirror, chip away at the mirror, is it going to all smash straight away? Okay, is it going to all smash straight away? This would probably be what happens if you try and cross the abyss without doing the lower spheres first. A little bit like putting a turbocharged high voltage battery into a battery pack that is nowhere near able to hold the necessary voltage that that battery requires to be able to function. Then it is a bit like taking a big pickaxe and then breaking it all straight away. Whereas what happens when you initiate through the lower spheres first in both trees, you're taking that hammer, hitting it on the mirror fractures, and then it gradually starts to fracture more. Maybe some of those individual personas that you're becoming aware of then start to kind of fracture into each other, and you see how they're kind of interlinked and connected, and how different aspects are built off of the same trauma that have learned to respond in different ways according to the nature of the trigger and things like that. Okay, so the abyss is a gradual process of watching this old self fracture. And then the core rupture takes place, okay? The core rupture, which is normally an archetypal experience of somebody who is a vessel for the gatekeeper slash ruler of the abyss, which is Shugal Choronzon. Normally you encounter an archetypal experience, which is basically a mirror of these identities. Okay, so you initiate into the abyss, the persona fractures into all of these different individual personas, and then as it continues to fracture, eventually it will all completely rupture and completely fall apart. And this is the role of the core abyssal rupture, which is always going to be that an internal slash external experience. Normally it is an external experience. That is an archetypal experience that is brought to you as a mirror of what is falling away. And it kind of gives you a choice. Are you going to remain separated from your truth, or are you going to actually break your karma and see beyond the identity structures that you have cultivated when you projected your consciousness into that reflection? And the very role of that archetype is to break apart that mirror. Okay, the aspects of self come crashing down and it's no longer there. At which point you are then held within a liminal space between your lower and higher self. The liminal space where you have to become familiar with. You are literally standing with one foot. It's a little bit like, how do I describe it? It's a little bit like, say, for example, like a one-way mirror. Okay, it's like, oh my God, that's a mirror. There's another side to it. Okay, you break it, and then it opens up a whole other room to explore, a whole other space to explore. When you're in that liminal space, after the core abyssal rupture, it's a little bit like you've got one foot in the room that you were in, or in the prison room that you are trapped in, and then you've also got another foot in the room that represents the other side, being the higher self, but it hasn't fully formed yet. At which point you then eventually, once you've really allowed that process to unfold, you then feel yourself moving into a gestation period, which is represented by Binah. Okay, and Binah is the divine mother. Okay, which is there to basically hold the lower self in gestation. Okay, Hokmah, the divine masculine, thrusts the wisdom into existence, and then Binah is the one that comprehends that energy, conceives it, and then holds the lower self into in gestation before it projects its consciousness into the reflection. So after you've gone through that rupture of your identity, you're likely not really going to know much about who you are anymore. I mean, don't get me wrong, your name will still be your name and all of these things, but your identification with these things will be completely gone, because realistically, you will have witnessed the death of everything about what was, about you, everything that you thought you were, be that the Sephirotic abyss or the Qliphothic abyss. After that, you move into Binar, which is where your new lower self starts to take form in harmony with your higher self. But the triggering thing about Binar, being the sphere of Saturn, all about karmic rebalancing and restriction, the core thing about Binar is that it is a challenging sphere because you have to be okay with being held in gestation, being held within the womb space. And you have to understand here that there is not actually a definitive linear result to the higher self. Okay, and if you rush into trying to understand it too quickly, then it's very easy to then try and reconstruct an illusionary persona and attach to that. Because once you've been through the abyss and you've been through that deconstruction and you're in Binar, you have to be patient. It's quiet in there, divine silence, almost painful silence, where you're just kind of sat in the womb waiting for your new reality to be birthed, but it hasn't been birthed yet. And this is where a lot of people, including myself, got very strong gnosis into how I was forcing my soul and inner child to be something that I thought I needed to be, forcing my soul, my inner child, my innocence to be something that I felt like it needed to be by a certain point. And that was an expression of my parental figures, my parent part inside of me. So in Binar, it all has to sit, yeah, in escrow. It's a bit like your new lower self that is going to be more fluid and adaptable according to the image of the higher self is not born yet. It's taking form. It's held in escrow before you actually receive the full power of it. And as you embody that divine silence, then you are you're allowing, you're embodying the receptivity of the mother and allowing your reality here to be cultivated through resonance and not through control. This is why Binar is such an important sphere, because you are learning to embody the medicine of the Divine Mother, learning how to not force what is being held in gestation, in incubation, not forcing it out earlier. It's a little bit like having a child in an incubator and then basically unwiring the child from the incubator and then being like, right, I'm ready for you to be a businessman now. This is literally what we do. Okay, we take that child and we force it into these predefined roles. Those roles are no longer a thing in the abyss, and now you have to let yourself embody your true will. You have to let the lower self that is in full harmony with your true will fully gestate and fully take form within the womb space without knowing what it is going to look like. Only then can you cross into Hokmah, where you start to develop what you came into this process for, which is illumination, okay, and quick lightning bolt insights whereby you come to terms with different things and you really become a channel for divine wisdom, and you really start to, your new self basically really starts to take form. But this is where you also have to use the qualities that you've developed in Binar to not basically try and force these qualities into a material existence until they have fully gestated. Okay, and this is where you really learn that true wisdom and true power is not in the pursuit of knowledge, is not in all of the downloads that you're getting from all of these new age Pleiadian beings. It's not in these big waves and lightning bolts of information, but lies in your ability to conceive and let this insight gestate into something tangible. This is where you have to let go of the need to seek in a way that is not sustainable for your evolution in order to ultimately allow that pure divine wisdom to stream in to that womb space and actually take form. This really teaches you that true wisdom does not lie in the accumulation of knowledge or downloads, but it lies in your ability to conceive that wisdom and actually let it shape and gestate into a form which is actually fluid and supportive of your ongoing evolutionary process. Whereas anything that you are trying to force into being, which is what the default lower self is trying to do, anything that you are trying to force into being is going to be built off of scarcity. Okay, and this is massive. Okay, I want to hammer this home for all of the people who get in touch with me saying that they want to go into the occult to build their business and become, financially independent and all of these things. This is where you really have to understand that you can only cultivate effectively from your true will. You can only truly cultivate your reality from a place that is optimally authentic to you. If you're trying to force yourself to be something specific, then what you're doing is that you're identifying with the lower self. You are identifying with the reflection in the mirror without being willing to shatter the illusion that is holding it together. And Hokmah shows you that it's your job to create from your true will, not through control, through resonance. And only then do you reach Kether, which is the divine bliss, the bliss before separation, the union, oneness, where you have to embody that true archetype of the higher self, absorb it, and allow it all to be sent down back into the lower self, whereby this new lower self begins to take tangible form, and everything that you have been through within the previous spheres start to properly and tangibly crystallize into the body. And now your lower self has been restructured and has been basically liquefied into a more fluid form, a more fluid structure to carry you through the later stages of your evolutionary process. Absolutely essential process to go through if you really want to connect to the true will. It's not as simple as, oh, I'm connected to my true will. Connecting to the true will hurts. It does, because you have to shatter those identities. Okay, transitioning from your predefined lower self into your higher nature, and then integrating that higher nature, these higher dimensional aspects of yourself, into your body is the great work. This is the Magnus Opus. So the 4 stages of the Philosopher's Stone take place once you've crossed the abyss. The first stage of the Philosopher's Stone is Binah. The second stage is Hokmah. The third stage is Kether. And then the final stage is when it all takes form, back into the physical body, back into the physical, tangible experience. So with the Qliphoth, it's a very similar concept, just in the opposite way. Okay, they are really one path. Okay, they are one path if you are approaching it from the perspective of integration and individuation. So if I show the Qliphoth here and show the abyss on the Qliphoth here, then what we are really looking at is the same thing, just mirrored in the primordial realms. Okay, representing the source of the Sephiroth. So again, the abyss represents the mirror in which the higher aspects of yourself project itself into. And instead of being manifestations of the divine, it's manifestations of distortion that run reality without you actually realizing it. Okay, whereas the upper spheres, the upper triad being Thaumiel, Gagiel, and Satariel, these represent the shells, the illusionary aspects of divinity itself that actually run the world from the unconscious mind. So when the illusions of divinity then project themselves into a tangible reality, then the lower 7 spheres, being Nehimoth, Gamaliel, Samiel, Arabzarak, Thagirion, Golachab, and Gagshibla, represent the different expressions of this repression of divinity. Okay, basically the consequences of the repression of divinity. So with Thaumiel, the opposite to Kether, Thaumiel represents the highest realm of separation and divine opposition. So basically this represents the calcification of the pineal gland, whilst Kether represents the activation of the pineal gland. So Thaumiel, when it's solidified and echoes itself down, it echoes that separation in the various forms that is mirrored by the tree of life. So whilst Kether represents divine opposition, you've got Thaumiel that represents pure separation and divine opposition, which then radiates itself down, separates further into Gagiel, which bestows control over the masses, what happens when wisdom gets concealed, and ultimately used against people around you, this causes people to seek leaders. And then Satariel weaves the lies of divinity into creation itself, making you think that you are entirely separate and forcing you to identify with veils of illusion, having the truth concealed from you and feeling comfortable with that. Only then does it reflect itself in the abyss, okay? That oppression then looks in the mirror, and then the reflection of that divine oppression then gets mirrored in the individual Qliphoths, okay? And the seven lower Qliphoths, dealing with the seven inner planets, are an exact mirror of that divine essence, but expressing itself in individual perversions, desires, and unchecked power. Okay, so Gag-Shibla, the shadow aspect of Tifereth, is inverted abundance. Okay, inverted abundance, holding addictions, holding basically various coping mechanisms that keep you separated from abundance itself. Golachab is the repression of passion and innocence that then gets distorted into rage and unchecked desire. Dagirion is the very depiction of illusion of grandeur in its own self, in its own as its own standalone thing. When the passion and abundance is taken away, then we end up building a life off of pretense. We have to identify with pretense. Arab Zarak puts us on a illusionary treadmill, whereby we are running towards an illusionary result, causing ourselves to be caught in coping mechanisms and all of these different fruits of the ego, whereas Samael represents the solidified ego, where we basically get completely lost in ignorance, but basically masking that ignorance as fact, and basically solidifying our ego into a form that basically keeps us separated from our truth and authenticity. Gamaliel represents the corrupted sexual energy, what happens when the divine energy is encased to that level. The sexual energy cannot flow up into the higher aspects of the field, so it gets stuck in the perversions, in the illusions of the feminine energy and the societal level projections on the feminine energy. And then it streams into Nehimoth, which is where your physical sensations get trapped and you move into dissociation and unconsciousness. So it mirrors the tree of life, but is the opposite way around. Whereas the tree of life, Keta, Hokmah, and Binah, represents the various aspects of the higher self and the pure aspects of the higher self. The supernal triad and the Qliphothic realms are basically what liberates the true aspect of your higher self that exists beyond the cosmos itself. Okay, so to summarize, the abyss is the mirror that acts as the primary projection point. Okay, the primary projection point in which your higher self projects its consciousness into that reflection, and us as the lower self is basically there to identify with that individual reflection. So in order to truly connect to the true will, we have to experience the identity rupture that is brought by the abyssal crossing. We have to experience the identity rupture that is brought by shattering those individual personas that are making up the lower self. And ultimately, the purpose of that is to bring the higher aspects of self into the physical, tangible body. This is the purpose of Kabbalistic initiation, is to bring the higher aspects, the true godhood, from the higher dimensions of reality into ourselves. It basically to integrate the divine, our own divinity, from within this physical, tangible body. It's not about getting rid of the lower self, but it's about ultimately maturing the lower self and molding it into a clearer vessel and image of the divine and of our true divinity. Absolutely essential concept to understand, but I think that's everything that I needed to speak about in today's video. It was a deep one today, so if you're interested in Kabbalistic initiation, then do revisit this video as it is important. If you're interested in full initiatory systems through the Sephiroth and the Qliphoth, then check out my Patreon. You can gain access at just £20 per month. But for now, thank you guys. Definitely hit like and subscribe if this video was helpful to you, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.